On that Friday morning, the 19th of May, I received a call to tell me that there had been a murder in the Lisburn area.
I made my way upstairs, looked through the bedroom door, and saw a quite horrific scene.
As a kid, it didn't make any sense. The thought of people, you know, hurting other people, you know, the fact that someone could hurt someone, or as a kid, that didn't make any sense to me.
Your job at that point is to take on the responsibility to find out who caused that man's death. Neighbours were saying to us, do you know about the fireman?
He talked about hating him. On one occasion he wrote, I hate him. We had the femme fatale, we had the fire chief. Crime fueled by sex and lust.
I got angry for everything. For the situation, for the courts, for the man who, you know, took my father's life. I was angry for everything.
The murder happened in Audley Avenue, which is to the north side of Lisburn. It is in a very quiet, peaceful residential area. My name is Roy McComb. In May 2000, I was a detective inspector with responsibilities for the Lisburn district. We had had a series of phone calls and messages that had indicated that what we were dealing with was, first of all, a burglary in which there was now a dead body in the middle of the crime scene. When we entered the property, I was struck by how otherwise quite normal the property was. When I went upstairs, the bedroom was a brutal scene. You had a young man in a prone position with very, very severe head wounds. There was a pool of blood around where his body lay. He was propped up against the wall in his bedroom and close to a chest of drawers.
The victim was a man named Paul Gault. His father, Paddy, arrived at the scene shortly after the police.
Paul's father was contacted by a neighbour to say something's happened. There's been a burglary at Paul's house, and he forced his way past the police cordon. When he described the detail of getting into the bedroom and holding his son, I mean, those are sort of the memories in an investigation that just really bring it back to this is a human life that has been taken. For Paddy to find and discover his son in the way that he did was just a traumatic moment. To hold your son who's been beaten to death in his own bedroom, just the human impact that had on Paddy and his family is just very difficult to capture. You can't not be moved. When you're given the responsibility as a senior officer to lead an investigation, that's an owner's responsibility, so you do become very committed to doing the very best you can.
Jonathan Gault, take one.
My name is Jonathan James Gault, and Paul Gault was my father. The clearest memory I have is being a child and sitting on my father's knee, and he must have been playing some game on the PlayStation, and I remember just vividly sitting there and watching him play the games. But I always remember him playing his racing game. It is always, it's the most vivid memory I have as a kid, was sitting on his knee and watching him play this game. Strange memory, that's the one I've always remembered, and it's always stuck with me. You know, my mum always said he liked his racing games, he liked, you know, as a job, he was a lorry driver, so, you know, he liked open road.
Paul Gault was 34 years old. He lived with his wife, Lesley, raising their 5-year-old triplets, 2 little girls, and their brother, Jonathan.
I don't remember really anyone saying anything when it first happened. A lot of protection, a lot of adults and stuff speaking in other rooms. You know, a lot of things were talked about in private. I mean, what really can you say to a kid that age? You know, you can only reassure them, and I feel like as a kid, a lot of things weren't talked about because they didn't want, you know, as a kid, you don't want to tell them things too early. You know, maybe give them a skewed view of the world.
Following the discovery of the body of Paul Gault, the detectives now faced a mammoth task of trying to work out exactly what happened in the Gault family home.
When we arrive, we know nothing other than what we've been told at that point, that there's been an incident, and we have to figure out what happened. Is it a crime? What type of crime, and who was involved? How does this completely unknown person who has no police history, no criminal record, zero police intelligence about him, suddenly end up beaten to death in the privacy of his own bedroom? It's a very, very unusual event, so our learning curve was very steep on the 19th of May 2000.
My name is Professor James Spears. At the time of the murder of Paul Gault, I was the lead forensic scientist for the Forensic Science Agency of Northern Ireland. When I got the call early that morning, we were given scant details such as it's a burglary gone wrong, which resulted in the death of the owner of the house, Paul Gault. We have a certain amount of time to undertake an examination of the scene. I made my way upstairs, looked through the bedroom door, and saw a quite horrific scene. There was blood splatter, bits of brain, skull on the floor. Almost like a tin of paint exploding in a room.
Near the body, police found a hockey stick that they believed to be the murder weapon.
The hockey stick was heavily blood-stained. That was obviously taken away for full examination to see if we can identify anybody who may have handled the hockey stick through fingerprints and through DNA.
But Professor Spears had a problem.
It's difficult to do a DNA analysis because there's overload of the victim's blood, which makes it extremely difficult to find trace levels. We didn't find any fingerprints or DNA from somebody touching the hockey stick.
In any investigation, the thread of the investigation can diminish as you get further away from the crime scene. You begin to lose forensic evidence, you begin to lose the opportunity to gather evidence from static points like CCTV evidence or from witnesses. So you have to always move at pace in the first 24, 48, 72 hours.
It's just if you were passing through the area.
One of the first courses of action we would have done as an investigation team would be to start knocking on doors to find out, you know, who might know something that would be relevant to our investigation.
If anyone in the local area knows anything, saw anything, heard anything, please get in contact with us at Lisburn Police Station.
The next door neighbour who owned the property on the other side of the semi-detached house, he was able to give us a very detailed account of hearing noises. He was actually in the bedroom on the other side of where Paul had been murdered at the very moment that Paul was being murdered. He was able to tell us that the digital clock in his bedroom was showing between 9 and 9:00 something. So it was between 0900 and 0909. So we had a 9-minute window in which this murder would have taken place.
Martin Breen, Deputy Editor-in-Chief at Belfast Telegraph and Sunday Life. News travels fast, and very quickly we were dispatching a reporter to the scene at Audley Avenue. Early reports were that this looked like a burglary gone wrong. All we knew at that time was there was a police manhunt for whoever was responsible for this murder. There were pictures used in the media at large of Lesley and Paul with the children, pictures that were taken shortly after their birth. Because it was big news that triplets had been born in Lisburn, so the local paper was interested in that. By all accounts, they were childhood sweethearts.
Jonathan remembers as a child growing up, after the murder of his father, he was subjected to intrusive media attention.
Did you feel exposed?
Oh, yes, 100%. Even times playing in the street as a kid, you'd have people in cars taking pictures, and as soon as you glanced around, you just speed off. And as a kid, you were just sitting saying, this isn't normal. Like, what is this?
Detective McComb constructed a timeline for the morning of May the 19th, using information provided by Paul's wife, Lesley.
Lesley had been taken away to be with her family, so I didn't get to see Lesley for some time later, but my detectives were dispatched to speak to her. They got up in the morning and they were all getting ready to go to school. Unusually for that morning, Paul went with Lesley and the children to go to the primary school where the children were dropped off.
Lesley explained to police that Paul had taken the day off work so she and Paul could head away for the weekend to the Killyhevlin Hotel in Enniskillen.
That became relevant because instead of being in Belfast, Paul was at the primary school taking his kids. After the children were dropped to the primary school, the Gaults went home. He got out of the car at the front of their door. She then got into the driver's seat. She then wanted to go and visit her parents, who also lived in Lisburn, and she then went to a local chemist to buy some medicines for the children.
Paul went inside to pack. The police worked under the theory that he was then interrupted by the burglar. But for Detective McComb, something didn't add up.
In the kitchen, there was evidence which suggested something out of the ordinary. There was a bag, a sports bag, which had been filled up with items from the house, which was supposedly the evidence indicating a burglary. There was a PlayStation, there was a video recorder, there were items of glassware, and there was trinkets, not anything of tremendous value. When you look at something like that, you think, well, is this right? Does this feel like how burglaries have taken place? Instinctively, the idea that we had a burglary in which the very items that a burglar was supposed to take, who would then carry out a most horrific murder, and then would leave the items that he stole, just didn't seem to square.
Forensics were also suspicious about how the burglar entered the house.
I was unhappy about the way the glass was broken. I'm not a glass expert, but the distribution of the glass was a bit suspect. I just had a gut feeling, and that's why I called in immediately Walter McCorkle to look at it.
My name is Walter. I was a forensic scientist at the time of this incident. The first task that I undertook was to take a sample of the glass from the ground and a sample of glass from the door. We also examined the shoes of the deceased in the bedroom, and they showed a complete absence of broken glass.
If Paul Gault had come home to go to his bedroom to pack a bag for the day trip and uncovered the door with the glass broken, he first of all would have reacted. He made no calls, he phoned for no police assistance, and when we examined the footwear that he was wearing, there was no glass on his shoes. So Paul had come home, the glass had not been broken.
The perpetrator was able to gain access to the upstairs and was able to gain access to Paul Gault without making Paul Gault aware that that person was there. particularly with the breaking of the glass on the door. That surely would have alerted Paul Gault that somebody was in the house.
When Walter McCorkle examined the broken glass more closely, something else was odd.
Normally you will just find the pane has been totally obliterated, totally removed by someone perhaps putting a brick through it or an iron bar. On this occasion, the glass had been scored before the glass was broken, which is quite an unusual aspect to encounter. When all the items were examined, we were able to note that there was no glass on the trainers of the deceased. This indicated he had not walked through the broken glass at the door. So therefore, the glass had to have been broken after he had entered the house.
Ultimately, we asked the question, how many times in every burglary in Northern Ireland is a glass cutter used to facilitate entry? And when you do that, and you add the final filter, which is on how many of those burglaries end up with high levels of violence, the answer was only on one occasion, the murder of Paul Gault. So the conclusion we reached was that the very last thing that the person who'd carried out the murder had done was to stage the crime scene and to break the glass in the kitchen door.
It was now clear that this was not a burglary gone wrong. Lesley Gault's husband, Paul, had been murdered.
This had been a very targeted and a very deliberate murder, as opposed to Paul being killed as a byproduct of somebody trying to escape from a burglary gone wrong. This was a clearly focused attack on Paul. As part of any murder investigation, you undertake a victimology to understand who is the victim, because in their past may be the circumstances that identify how they ended up being the victim of this murder. What I like to think of the family as really representing a Northern Ireland of a new era. His family were a Roman Catholic family originally from West Belfast. They had moved into a mixed area. Their family were intermarried between Protestant and Catholic. They'd married between faiths, and they were a family at peace. They were a really, really decent family. So we were very clear that Paul was not involved in any criminality. He was fully employed as a driver. He worked for a reputable organisation in Belfast. He was just a hard-working man.
You always think one day they'll come back. I think as a child you have that imagination. Maybe it's all just a misunderstanding. And then as time went on, we were told your father will be coming back. When you're young, you kind of think that life is going to be normal and perfect and, average for everyone. But, as a kid back then, I knew things were very different in my family. There was no kind of direction of knowing what's going to happen next. The gravity of the situation, I guess I didn't realise as a kid how, impactful it would be.
His funeral was held at St Coleman's Catholic Church in Lambeg, where he'd got married.
I do remember being at the funeral and being really young then.
Paul Gault's widow Lesley arrived with the couple's triplets. They're just 5 years old.
I think as a kid at 5, I didn't really grasp what it was. But I remember being there. I think that's really when I knew, that he wouldn't come back. My mother tried and did her best. She had to be the strongest person in the room. Looking back, I realised that she was fearful, she was scared, she was depressed. And I feel having 3 kids to then take care of and everything in the news and the media added even more pressure. I don't know how she was able to do it.
He was liked by everyone, good-natured, full of fun. But along with all this, he had a sense of responsibility which came through in the family-orientated nature of his life.
My grandparents would always tell me about him. They would always tell me I look just like him, I act just like him. You know, you would see them sometimes, you know, looking at me, and I would say to them, you know, why are they looking at me? And they would say, you're just like your father. You know, you're just so like him. I feel like my creative side, I got it from him. He was a very creative person. He always wrote little short stories, and he, you know, did drawings and stuff.
Roy McComb, take 2.
Neighbours were saying to us, do you know about the fireman? There's a fireman that visits that property on a regular basis. We had clearly someone who we needed to speak to quite urgently to say, you know, what is it that you can tell us that can help us understand how the husband in this home that you visited on a regular basis is now dead?
Police now began tracing this mysterious fireman.
Within a couple of hours, we had the details of the vehicle, the Vauxhall Cavalier. We were able to work through the fire and rescue headquarters. They identified the vehicle. They confirmed it was one of their vehicles. They identified the fireman to be Gordon Graham, who was a senior officer in the fire and rescue headquarters, which was a short distance away from the crime scene.
But then they uncovered something else that connected the fireman to the Gault family.
Lesley was a civilian member of staff in the fire and rescue headquarters at the same building where Gordon Graham was working as an assistant divisional officer.
And there was more. Detective Roy McComb and his team discovered that Lesley and the fireman knew each other very well.
He confirmed that he'd been in a relationship with Lesley Gault. We have had witnesses from the neighbourhood who were confirming behaviour that indicated an affair was going on, that quite literally Paul Gault was driving out of the home at around 7:30, and within minutes the fireman's car was arriving at the Gault home. That affair took place on many locations, but Paul's home, 5 Audley Avenue, was the primary location where Lesley Gault and Gordon Graham met for their physical affair.
Within a few days, we knew of the name Gordon Graham. We knew he was this mysterious fireman. Gordon Graham was a married father of 3. He was also very ambitious in his career. He had been fast-tracked in the fire service. He had risen up the ranks. He was head of the health and safety department, and if any visiting fire officers or others needed to speak to somebody senior, a lot of the time it was him. They first struck up a friendship, and within a matter of months, this had turned out into a full-blown affair. Some colleagues in the fire authority there noticed something was amiss, and in fact, on one occasion, they are believed to have been caught in a state of undress while a fire service function was going on, and we are told that Gordon Graham was reprimanded for that. Within days, it became clear that there was much more to this, and then journalists began investigating how did this love triangle end in the murder of an innocent husband and father.
Detective McComb approached Lesley Gault for her side of the story.
She admitted at that point that she had been having an affair with Gordon Graham, but that the affair had ended on the 1st of May when Paul became aware of it. Paul had overheard a conversation that was taking place between Lesley and Gordon Graham. She told us about the nature of the call, that Paul was hurt because of the discovery of the affair, that she had admitted to Paul the affair, and that they'd had the rest of that day talking to each other as husband and wife about what to do. There was another call that evening with Gordon Graham, in which we were told that Paul Gault said to Gordon Graham, "It's over. She's staying with me. I win." That begins to give us a sense of well, could this ending of the affair be the motivation? Could this comment, "I win, she's staying with me," be that trigger that could have spurred someone like Gordon Graham to plan and to plot and to ultimately carry out a murder of the man who was taking away the woman that he loved?
Detectives now question Gordon Graham about his whereabouts on the morning of May 19th.
He talked about arriving into work at a certain time, working on his computer, and then taking a period of time out to walk down the centre of Lisburn to buy a present for his wife. He talked about going into the food store in Marks and Spencer's. He talked about buying a carton of blackcurrant juice.
CCTV captured Gordon Graham approximately 45 minutes after the murder.
The alibi was a good alibi. He'd given a very clear account of his movements down to minutes of what he was doing. It was corroborated by receipts. It was corroborated by CCTV. It was corroborated by the login details of his computer.
But to be conclusive, the team decided to break down the alibi minute by minute.
When we spoke to Gordon Graham, he gave us a very clear account of walking from Fire Brigade headquarters, which would be in Castle Street behind me, down into Bow Street, where we're now standing. They walked the length of Bow Street to the end, checking out supposedly shops where he could buy a present for his wife. And he gave an account of walking down one side and walking up the other. And that was at the critical point when we had a witness telling us that that's when he suspected the murder had happened, between 9 o'clock and 9:09 in the morning. So we had a 9-minute window in which we said, if we can find Gordon Graham in that period, then he personally was not involved in the murder. Whether he set somebody up to do it is a different question, but we wanted to rule him out of involvement in this murder. And so we set out to prove, or indeed to disprove, this alibi. One of my detectives spent days identifying and recovering CCTV evidence from the area where Gordon Graham said he was, and examining that in minute detail to find Gordon Graham. And if we found Gordon Graham, then clearly his alibi was solid and that he was not personally involved in the murder. In May 2000, this was the Orange mobile phone shop. It had a camera system that looked out through the front door of the shop. It gave a complete coverage, the entire breadth of Bow Street, and it gave enough width of coverage. So this was important to us because this was the one spot that Gordon Graham had to have passed, and we would have collected him on CCTV. It looked all the way across the breadth of Bow Street. It would have captured Gordon Graham moving left to right or right to left. And that gave us absolute certainty that if Gordon Graham walked in that area, we would have seen him in his fireman's uniform. We examined that as often and as much detail as we could, frame by frame. And Gordon Graham wasn't to be seen. Now, if he's not in Bow Street, then he's somewhere else. It's certainly a moment when your heartbeat rises. When you think, well, he has given us an alibi. He's been very clear in that alibi. He's been very firm in his commitment to this alibi. And we have now effectively broken that alibi. He's not where he said he was. Does it get us over the line? Not necessarily. Does it get us close to that line? Yes, it does.
When police first interviewed Gordon Graham, he volunteered his clothing as part of the investigation. Now, glass expert Walter McCorkle examined them for potential evidence.
When glass is broken, small microscopic fragments will be projected back into the environment and onto the breaker. You're talking microscopic, much less than a millimetre across. It's not visible to the naked eye, and indeed the perpetrator, the individual breaking the glass, may not even know that the fragments have been projected from the breaking or broken glass onto their clothing.
I got a phone call from the forensic science officer to tell me that we had found glass in the shirt pocket of his fire officer uniform, which was indistinguishable from the glass from the back window in the Gault family home.
But Walter had found something even more important.
In the footwear that Gordon Graham had offered, embedded in the sole of the shoe that he was wearing at the time we first spoke to him, was a lump of glass.
Glass pieces like this typically dislodge themselves within hours.
The glass was extremely significant because it indicated a quite narrow timeline between exposure to the break-in or broken glass and the items of clothing and footwear being bagged and submitted to the laboratory.
We now had a very direct forensic connection to the part of the crime scene, namely the broken door at the back, which was putting Gordon Graham at the crime scene at the relevant time. At that point, we now had a broken alibi. We had the relationship that was clearly tempestuous. And we now had forensic evidence that put him to the crime scene, this broken window that we had established had been broken after Paul had been murdered.
The evidence had started to point to Gordon Graham as the murderer. But Detective McComb wondered if he'd worked alone.
If we accepted that Paul Gault had been murdered in what was effectively an ambush, then how would the person who carried out that ambush know where Paul was going to be at a certain point, at a certain time?
Police believed only one person could know these details.
The common denominator in that was Lesley Gault. For Paul to be murdered, he needed to be off work, which we say Lesley organised by arranging the trip to the Killyhavelin. He needed to be out of the house to enable the ambush to be set up. And we say that was enabled by him being taken to the primary school with the kids for the first time. And finally, he needed to be home on his own, which was arranged because Paul was dropped off at the house to pack their suitcases, something that she had asked him to do.
Police now felt they had enough evidence. On June 20th, just a month after the murder, they arrested Gordon Graham and Lesley Gault.
The detective inspector told the court that there was substantial circumstantial evidence, saying he believed he could connect 4 particles of glass found on the accused's clothing with the scene of the crimes. Gordon Graham still strenuously denies the charge.
He was remanded in custody. The woman arrested at the same time as the accused was released on police bail. Shortly after the arrests, the fire service confirmed that the two were employees, a firefighter and an administrator.
Once it became known that Paul's widow had been arrested, that was very much front page news, because for the general public, this was a huge shock. The original theory that there was a burglary gone wrong, suddenly it was clear that police thought there was much, much more to this.
The media were gripped by the story.
There were plenty of pictures of Lesley. She had been photographed at the funeral. She had featured in the media before with the triplets, and then headlines like Love's Triangle, Femme Fatale, things like that. That really provokes public interest.
Lesley Gault, 35-year-old mother of triplets.
Lesley Gault. Lesley Gault. Lesley Gault.
Lesley Gault.
Mrs. Gault.
There were so many angles and so many interesting things that people wanted to know the background.
Obviously, in the situation she was in, she was trying to do the best she could. She knew that people were judging her. She always proclaimed her innocence, and we believed her, and a lot of people didn't. Me and my mum talked about it. She said she's going to court. She always said, just look, if anything happens, I'll always be here for you anyway. And she said, look, if I'm not here to pick you up, your grandparents will be. I remember even thinking as a kid, if she goes away, I'll see her in 15, 18 years. I knew it'll be a bumpy ride, even as a young kid. It's not till we grow older we realise, the pressure and the pain some adults have to go through for their kids.
The trial for Paul Gault's murder began on September 17th, 2002.
Lesley Gault's lover, Gordon Graham, with whom she'd conducted a torrid 2.5-year liaison. The Crown claims Lesley Gault helped him.
At the start of the trial, both Gordon Graham and Lesley pleaded not guilty.
We had a joint trial where both Gordon and Lesley stood trial together for around 9 weeks. It captured the imagination of the press, and we had to try to manage the fact that we didn't want people tried by the media. We wanted them tried in the court, which is the right place to hear it.
For the media, this was a complete joint enterprise. We had the femme fatale, we had the other part of the love triangle, the fire chief. Together they had conspired to kill Paul Gault, get him out of the scene so they could be together. Crime fueled by sex and lust. It was the kind of stuff that you see in movies. Any little scrap of detail was being lapped up by the audiences.
The trial began with the most sensational aspect of the case: the affair between the two accused.
This couple had had a very tempestuous, very vivid love affair, and in fact was not only the backdrop to the murder, but was in fact the motivational vehicle for the murder. We had only Lesley's account that the conversation on the 1st of May had ended with Paul Gault saying, she's staying with me, I win. If this conversation had happened, then that would have been like a red rag to a bull to say, well, we'll just see about that fella.
The prosecution revealed to the jury a series of explosive love letters.
The letters were provided to us by Gordon Graham, and they were a considerable bundle of letters both to Lesley and from Lesley Gault. So these letters were actually a door into the minds of the people that we now suspected of being involved in the murder of Paul Gault. I love you more than you will ever know. I would do anything for you. Don't let it extinguish that fire. It yearns to burn brightly. I know you're probably under interrogation as I write. Let me plan our escape. So it was important for us to understand the intensity, the nature of the relationship, and whether the letters indicated some sort of plan about a future that these two people would have had in the absence of Paul Gault.
Today, love letters written by Mrs. Gault and Mr. Graham were read out to the jury. In one, written by Mr. Graham just a month before the murder, he pledged to Mrs. Gault, "Soon, my love, we will escape the things that temporarily trap us. We will never regret the step we're about to take."
Courtroom was tense and it was a bit surreal. We knew what they had written to each other in the letters, declaring their undying love for each other, how much they wanted to be with each other, and yet in court they did not acknowledge each other once. When the love letters were read out in court, Lesley Ann kept her head down because she clearly was very embarrassed. She had other family members who had only heard these letters for the first time and some of the things that they had written to each other. Gordon Graham remained cocky, remained stoic. He didn't show any emotion whatsoever.
But it wasn't just love that these letters illustrated to the jury.
Gordon Graham showed a deep resentment to Paul Gault, obviously because Paul Gault was in the way of him and Lesley Ann being together. He talked about hating him. On one occasion he wrote, "I hate him." In the run-up to the murder, he was getting more and more impatient and wanted Paul out of the way. He said things like, "He is lost, we will soon be together, let me plan our escape." He was clearly obsessed with getting Paul Gault out of the equation and at any means possible.
The significance of those particular expressions was important to us to give an understanding about the level of intensity, particularly from Gordon Graham, about how he felt towards Lesley, and from an investigative perspective, how that informed how that could quickly become a motivation for someone to murder.
The trial was told that Mr. Gault had discovered his wife's love affair, and it was alleged that Graham and Lesley Gault had then connived to get rid of him.
We would see it on the news. Say my mother was going to be in court. My grandparents would obviously be watching the news. I think a lot of the court stuff, you know, we were obviously withheld from, which is what you would do for kids. A lot of the legal stuff or the court stuff, we wouldn't have understood that anyway.
The trial moved on to the crime scene.
I remember looking at the crime scene photographs as shown in court, thinking, this is just how you would stage a crime scene, because it just seems every drawer had been left open, every cupboard had been opened, things strewn everywhere. The experts were able to reveal that a lot of stuff was planted after the crime in terms of it was on top of the blood. It was a textbook how to stage your own crime scene.
The defense pushed for the prosecution to provide forensic evidence.
Anybody understands the forensic science behind blood spatter, blood pattern analysis, will know that if you're standing the length of a hockey stick away from someone and beating them to death repeatedly over the head, where the crime scene is just covered in blood, then you will have blood on you. So our working hypothesis was that the person who carried out the physical murder of Paul Gault will have been covered in blood, covered in blood.
The problem for the prosecution was that no blood had been found in Gordon Graham's clothing.
Someone had taken precautions and some forensic knowledge to know that by taking certain protection, they could undertake the attack and then, say if they were wearing PPE gear, remove that PPE gear and leave the scene and not leave any trace of blood when they were exiting the property.
But police found no PPE gear either. The missing evidence weakened the case.
In any investigation, there will be things that don't go as well as you planned. The ambition to do certain things doesn't play out, or actually maybe you're wrong in your assessment of what you're doing. So there's no such thing as a perfect investigation.
But forensic scientists did offer the prosecution some hope. DNA from the sports bag found at the scene.
What I'm trying to do is to find the habitual user of that bag. So from the hands, touch DNA, from sweat, etc. The DNA would be embedding itself within the fabric of the handle. Now, the key thing was at that stage, through our normal DNA procedures, we've struggled to analyze DNA from stuff that we can't see.
But a new technology was emerging called low-copy DNA, which could amplify the most minute samples.
So we sent those samples off from the inside of the bag and from the handles to the Forensic Science Service for analysis. The DNA profile of Gordon Graham was consistent with that found on the handles and found on the inside of the bag. In court, I described that as 1 in a billion, unrelated to any person.
A 1 in 1 billion chance that the DNA that he had identified was not that of Gordon Graham.
Graham's DNA was found inside a bag of valuables abandoned in the house, part of a ruse the Crown claimed to make the killing look like a botched burglary.
But for the defense, low-copy DNA was attacked as unreliable.
There was a lot of challenge to the nature, the science, the reliability, the possibility of any contamination. There was a very strong challenge put in by the defense team to say this DNA could not be relied upon.
The prosecution's case appeared to be on a knife edge.
You always get a little bit anxious around, well, will they follow the logic? Will they follow the evidence? Will they follow the story? As we've lived and breathed this for, 2 years at this point. They're 12 men and women who've never heard of this case.
The judge cleared the court, sending the jury to decide Gordon Graham and Lesley Gault's fate.
Mr. Donaldson reminded the jury that this was not a court of morals. A lot of people had affairs, he said, but that did not make them murderers.
When the first verdict arrived, it was unanimous.
When Gordon Graham was found guilty, he showed no emotion as he stood in the dock beside his co-accused and former lover. He was led away in handcuffs, facing a life sentence. The relatives of the murder victim gave their reaction as they left the court.
Justice had to be done. It had to be done. Justice was done.
He killed my son.
The jury of 10 men and 2 women spent over 7 hours deliberating on their verdict. They're still trying to decide on the case of Lesley Gault, who's jointly charged with her husband's murder.
The jury could not come to a decision on Lesley Gault. There would have to be a second trial.
After what happened, she didn't really leave the house. She was very, very depressed. All that stuff in the news and the media that, it painted my family in a very bad light, where they thought the whole family was like we were all like evil people or something.
Lesley continuously maintained her innocence.
Many times, sitting with my mother, she would just break down and cry. I think just things were getting to her, and as a kid, we would all just look at each other.
Lesley's second trial began on the 17th of February 2003. With Gordon Graham in jail, Lesley told her side of the story.
When she was giving evidence in the witness box, her main focus, to me, seemed to be outlining how much she despised Gordon Graham and what he had done, how he had destroyed her family, that it was Graham was infatuated with her, he was chasing her, she regretted ever getting involved with him, and it was because of this affair she felt morally responsible for Paul's death.
Talk about all these things for hours, like. Obviously my mother tries to speak about it best she can, but obviously it's very emotional for her. She feels guilty about things in the past. She feels it was her fault. I don't blame anyone for it. I just think, people make mistakes, people do things, things happen. If anything, I feel bad for her because, the stress I've dealt with, she's probably felt 10 times harder. I was the child. I guess it gave a couple of years where I could deal with it without people talking about it. With her as an adult with these things happening, it's, you've got 3 kids, you're an adult, you're in it, there's no escape.
The police case against Lesley was that she had conspired with Gordon Graham to get rid of Paul. She knew that he was going to be in the house at a certain time. She had dropped him off at the house around 9 a.m. on the morning of the murder, and they said she had told Gordon Graham that he would be going up to the marital bedroom to pack. Without the type of forensic evidence that was available against Gordon Graham, it was always difficult to know whether the jury would convict Lesley Ann Gault or not.
The prosecution's case hinged on proving that she had played a role in her husband's murder.
At the second trial, a very nervous Lesley Ann was obviously brought forward to hear the verdict. This was going to determine how she would spend the next 20 years or more.
Lesley Gault sat with her head in her hands when the guilty verdict was read out.
When the jury said she was guilty, she actually had to ask the prison officer beside her what was the verdict, and then she broke down. She was in such shock.
I believed that she was innocent, and I believed that she would come home. And then when we got told she wasn't coming home, that's when I knew, she could be away for a long time.
Lesley Gault was sentenced to life and taken to Maghaberry Prison.
I remember going to visits as a kid. You're going into the prison, you're going through all the checks, and all the police officers, and as a kid, that kind of place seems pretty crazy, you know? When you're seeing everyone sitting their visits, and you think to yourself, you know, these people have made mistakes, and they're in this building, they're not let out, you know? And, yeah, it's one of those things, hard to process. My mother kept a good attitude, positive about things, but I knew deep down that she would have been scared. You know, it wasn't until I got older that she told me how terrifying prison actually was. When my grandparents, they moved into the house, they basically took over. They took us to school, dinner, breakfast, they did everything for us. Just feeling lost and alone as a kid, you know, having no father. Your mum's in prison, you know people know about it, you know that it's been on the news, you know it's been in the newspapers. As a kid, I felt like I was caged in a box. I felt like everything had happened, I was caged, I couldn't get out, nowhere I could go, I was stuck. You know, this is my family, this is my life, this will haunt me forever. I felt, honestly, like this would haunt me forever.
But Lesley refused to accept the verdict and fought on.
Lesley appealed on a large number of legal points, and she lost on all of those legal points with the exception of one very narrow legal point. But it was sufficiently serious in the minds of the Court of Appeal to say that it had to then set aside the conviction.
Unbelievably, it transpired that Lesley Ann was going to get a third trial because it was ruled that the jury had been misdirected by the judge.
In the past 2 years, Lesley Ann Gault has been on trial 3 times for the murder of her husband.
Once again, the same evidence that had been used on the first trial, the same evidence that had been used on the second trial, was presented at the third trial.
The trial began in Omagh Crown Court on September 14th, 2004.
Crown Counsel Paul Ramsey QC told the jury, "You will," he told them, "slowly, inexorably and inevitably come to the conclusion that over 18 days in May, Lesley Gault and Gordon Graham went from being partners in love to partners in murder."
I don't think she went into that trial convinced she was going to walk out of that courtroom free. She'd already been up and down a roller coaster. First trial, no verdict. Second trial, being convicted, had spent, several months in prison by this stage.
The prosecution again made their case to the jury.
Mr. Ramsey told the jury that Lesley Gault had provided essential information that Gordon Graham needed to carry out his deadly work that morning. Lesley Gault and Gordon Graham had planned the murder and she had cooperated with him in the execution of it.
For the media and for the public, a lot of the same evidence was being played out again, and for those people who don't understand the court process, a lot of people are going, well, I've read all this before, why am I reading it again? The biggest interest was in whether Lesley Ann was going to be found guilty again or whether she would walk free.
When the verdict came, the jury found Lesley Gault not guilty.
Today, she left court a free woman and with the case finally closed.
I remember the headmaster taking me and my 2 sisters out and said, "Your mother's getting released today." My mother always told us, she'd always be there and she'd be home soon. That's what she would always say. But, we didn't realize at the time that if the third trial was unsuccessful, she would have been away for 15 plus years. Thank God she wasn't. She won the appeal and, it was a good day.
Gault left the court when she was freed. She was photographed leaving.
Mrs. Gault, have you any comments?
Mrs. Gault.
Can you tell us what you're going to do now?
She didn't give any statement until she released one later through her solicitor.
Lesley Ann Gault said she had lived through a nightmare that was almost unimaginable. She had been bereaved, imprisoned, vilified, and had to endure separation from her beloved children. Her only thoughts now, she said, were with her 2 daughters and her son.
found innocent according to law. Everyone sees the trial where it was guilty and she was in jail for a year. I guarantee half the people haven't seen the one where she was found innocent. My mother couldn't even get a job. You know, I don't think anyone would hire her. And a lot of places she would try and work at, people would say that they already knew who she was. Growing up, we were very, very, very poor, you know, extremely poor. People were making fun of the clothes I was wearing. I was super depressed as a kid. You know, I basically felt like an outcast in my own community. I got angry for everything. For the situation, for the courts, for the man who, you know, took my father's life. I was angry for everything. I was angry that I felt the world was unfair. I was angry that I felt that we'd been dealt a bad hand. The stuff that happened with my father as a kid, it really came down on me in my late teenage years. You know, I ended up falling into drinking, drugs, and my mother would always tell me she didn't think I'd see to live 18. I think one of the turning points was, I don't know what I was on, what I was doing, but I remember my mother saying, I think he's on something, I don't know what he's going through. You need to take him home, get him food, just... I kind of just realised, I was like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this? I really sorted myself out, you know, got myself sober, and I realised, you know, that I couldn't let these things just destroy me. You can't let anything just destroy you. The stages of grief, as people talk about, you're angry and you get depressed about the things first, and then you come with the acceptance. You essentially learn that, you know, unfortunately life sometimes isn't fair.
Are you always thinking of your dad? Are you missing, you know, just...
Every day, yeah. I still go and visit his grave regularly, you know. No, I'm right. I tell myself every time I go there I'm not going to cry this time, but you know, even today I told myself, you know, I'll probably not cry. I think I can talk about this without getting emotional, but you know, I can't. It happens every time. If my father could speak to me, he would say, look, these things happened. It's time to move forward. You know, life is worth living. My father wouldn't want me sitting in the corner crying about this every day. My father would want me to live my life.
Press red to be at the scene of the crime in the new series of Forensics, The Real CSI.